Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs.
Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and I'm super excited for today's episode. Today's guest is the Senior Director of Change Management Strategy at Sodexo. Please welcome to Frontline Innovators, Julie Whitten. Hello, Julie.
Hello, Justin.
I'm so happy to have you here today. And just before we started the show, we were talking about the fact that you also are a host of a conversation similar to this in a similar format. So we'll have to fill our guests in on a little bit more about what you do. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you the question that we start every show with, which is, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the deskless or frontline workforce today?
Thanks, Justin. It's such a great question. And, I started to reflect on it before our conversation, and there's so many different directions we could go in. But really the one thing that stuck out for me was the lack of connectivity to that particular audience, from the business to those frontline workers. And really what I mean by when I say that is that true understanding of what they need in their perspectives. And I don't know if you've ever heard that story about the six blind men and the elephant. But
I don't
it's
think
one
I have.
it's one I use when I teach some change management strategy. And it's these six blind men. They can't see anything. They're all touching this elephant, but they're touching different parts of the elephant. And they all think that whatever they're touching, maybe somebody's touching the tusk or the trunk or their tail, is true, right? And they're sharing verbally what they're feeling, what they're seeing, and the others think that they're lying or not telling the truth. And they're all touching the same elephant. But it's just such a great reminder that people have so many different backgrounds, so many different perspectives. And I think when I think about the frontline population that we have at Sodexo, I really kind of hold that story true of, sometimes we just don't understand or have a great understanding of all those different perspectives coming together. And we really need to think about meeting them where they are and helping to understand the barriers and how we work through them, whatever projects that we want to do with them. And then help them understand the why and what role they play in the business. So I think a lot of times they have this vested interest, and we're not always giving them or feeding them what they need to be a part of whatever it is we're trying to accomplish with our customers.
I agree completely. I think you just brought up some really great points. And in fact, I had a conversation earlier today with somebody who is a former podcast guest as well. And we were talking about the importance of ride-alongs, that just having people from the office, the corporate office, the regional office, whatever it may be, that are impacting change that's going to be felt by people out on the front lines, for them to go take a day and just truly meet them where they are, not just as stuff we put in a PowerPoint deck when we're talking strategy at corporate, but to actually go out in the field and to go spend a day in the life. And he was telling me a story of how surprised one of the frontline workers was in his scenario. Like, what are you doing out here from corporate? But that's actually part of the power of going out to the field, is to send that signal to them that we do care. We're out here because we want to ask you some questions. We want to learn about what you do. We want to learn about what's important to you. So I love that you started off on that front, and would like to explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, sounds great. I can certainly appreciate the ride along philosophy. And when I think about kind of things that really are important to these folks, it could be a number of different pieces of the puzzle. But I think that they really, at the end of the day, just want to be included, right? And they experience and see the business firsthand. They see, opportunities that we might not think of. They see barriers that we might not think of. So I just think that they have so much knowledge and valuable insight, and we don't tap into that enough.
I love it. All right, let's give the audience a little bit of a background about who they're listening to, and you have to include a little bit about the content that you're producing and a little bit about the background there. So give us the story.
All right. Well, I lead change management strategy and also internal communications for Sodexo North America. And I've been with the company for quite some time now. I don't know how I got to be one of those people, but 18 years. So certainly
Amazing.
it's been an interesting experience, but I think one of the things that has served me well in my career is that I started in the field in marketing, and I got to an opportunity to experience the business firsthand and understand the customers and the challenges, the opportunities. My background is actually in communications, so kind of it's a big company, and I've been very grateful that I've had the opportunity to explore many different parts of the business. So when I moved in kind of more of a corporate communications role, I stood in that role for some time. But the clients that I served were kind of the backbone of the business. So they were the part that's making offers, it's doing supply purchasing, safety, all of the menu and recipe development, all of the facilities management offers. So kind of the backbone. And long story short, when COVID came along and they needed somebody to sit on their crisis team from a comm standpoint, they asked me to kind of sit into that role. From there, I also found this love for change management, and I took a class, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that changed the way I work, and it really made a difference in the way that I viewed myself as a communication specialist, because change was such a big piece of comms. And historically, in my world, comms had been the last thing that people see before it goes out the door, but there's just so much that goes into the communication piece of things, with the what's in it for me, what behavior change are we trying to drive. So as I worked through COVID, one of the things that we did is we had to relay information to our management population quite quickly: what needs to be done, what procedures need to be followed, what offers and services can we help our clients with during this time. And to do that, we came up with this brainstorm of, we wanted to have a webcast that we did for our managers. So we ended up going live. It ended up being twice a week. Every week I was kind of on the air, just an internal broadcast, but we had, 2,000 to 3,000 managers. And the name of that broadcast was Rise and Thrive. And I really just enjoyed kind of being the face, the host of that, the creator of the content. I had a great production team behind me, but really also asking the hard questions of our leadership teams and what we should be doing. So established a lot of credibility, and 103 episodes later, we're still doing it 4 years later. And it's become quite a platform for things that we want to either talk about things that are changing. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done.
That is amazing. Congratulations on 103 episodes. We're at similar numbers, and I remember when we first had the idea of having this podcast format, I'd heard, and I didn't do a lot of research on this, so the number may be wrong, but I heard that most podcasts cease to exist after 7 episodes.
Oh,
And at the time, we had a partner that was helping us produce the show. And so I remember going to them and I said, I want to sign up for 100 episodes. And it was just kind of a forcing function for us that I knew it was going to be difficult. And I figured that 7 is probably, there's a reason for that. And whether it's 7 or 17 or 10, or it doesn't really matter. But the point
right.
is that it's hard to get momentum. It's hard to get the flywheel going. So I knew for us, we just had to have that forcing function. It's just say, let's commit long-term to this thing. It's going to be painful. There are some weeks that are going to be uncomfortable, but we're going to continue to plow through this. Did you have similar ups and downs along the initial journey, or did it just take off and start running right out of the gate? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of pressure, because definitely agility comes to mind, right? Where you
Yeah.
didn't have the information you needed until the 11th hour, and you're kind of pulling it out of people, or figuring out what's next, especially during the whole COVID and all the uncertainty. But then it slowly grew into, really finding these fantastic stories and telling them, and helping inspire others, and then asking those really tough questions, even if they couldn't be answered. And that built a lot of trust and credibility. So I do feel over the journey, we've had to kind of think about the what's next at certain times, so we're not repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
But after all this time, I still do enjoy doing it. So thanks so much for asking. Congratulations to you too.
Yeah, well, thank you, and congratulations to you guys. I know how big of an effort it can be, and that's a big audience that you have internally. And so I can imagine it's a really effective tool to use for internal purposes. That actually kind of leads me to a question, or just a part of what I'd like to talk to you about. You have an interesting background where you had some marketing experience, and then corporate communications, and then into change management. And this has come up a few times when I've talked to other change management professionals, that this is probably obvious to everybody other than me until I had the first few conversations. But change management, there is like an element of marketing in change management, because it's a lot about communicating and helping to understand people, understand the stakeholders, and then communicate in a way that can be persuasive, that can get them on board with what we're trying to do. How has your, first of all, I guess I should ask if you even agree with what I'm saying. I can see your head nodding, but the
I
people that are
do.
listening on AirPods can't see that. But I'd be curious to get your take on that. Do you agree? And then if so, how has your marketing background kind of affected your role as a change management leader today?
Yeah, great question. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think, I always tell people from a change side of things that we often underestimate the amount of socialization needed for a change to go well, right? And,
Yeah.
it's everything from building that business case at the beginning. And, a lot of times with some of the changes that I and my team are dealing with, we're really selling it to the leaders first, right? So, we've got to look at those black and white numbers, and speak their language when we're trying to sell or socialize, even the concept or the idea that, hey, this needs change management support. And then as we go deeper, we've got to sell it to the different sponsors. We're very big on sponsorship, being active and visible. What do we need them to do? So we're kind of selling all the way down the line, right? And then we look at our different stakeholders of how do we get buy-in for the change and adoption. Well, it's really thinking about it, what's in it for them, but how do we best position that, and how do we get them involved to help us co-create that change? So there really is a lot of kind of selling and or marketing involved in it. And I think over the years we've tried just different creative ways to do that, because obviously if you have so many of these going on, it's going to look the same after a while. So
Right.
we really do challenge ourselves to bring it forward in new and different ways. And we've got some governing bodies that have been very helpful with that. We do have a Voice of the Field Council, which is kind of our operations focused. It helps us really understand from the operator's perspective and all the way down to the frontline employee, how is this going to impact them, really running things by them. And then we've also got a change management council, which is kind of a group of senior leaders that, we kind of share best practices. We share some of the hangups that we're having. We work closely with that sister group, the Voice of the Field. And then we have a larger change management community that has over 500 members. And those are people in the organization of all levels that have expressed an interest in driving change. And we do our best to kind of educate and upskill them around change, because there's not change management professionals. There's just a handful of folks that do what we do, and that's why we need those ambassadors to be on our side to help us drive change.
Okay, we need to go down the path. I need to hear more about the Voice of the Field Council. I'm not even sure what my question is yet, because I
Yeah.
that's the first time I've heard you talk about that. But I'm fascinated, and would just like to explore. Can you give us a little bit more about the background, how that was created, and who sits on that council, and maybe some of the things that have the learnings that have come from participation in that council?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I think, been doing this maybe about 2.5 years. And really, the interest came from one of our CEOs who had a background in operations, and the frustration and pain point of so many initiatives getting rolled out to our field, but not run by our field. So built by our subject matter experts, people that sit in roles that might not sit closely to the business and or understand all of the impacts. And it was really at first a way to kind of intake all of the pain points that were currently being felt by the field and seeing how we can solve for them. But what it slowly evolved into is not only kind of that reactive state, but the proactive state of now, us expanding this council to include not only senior leaders of kind of operations, but also those developing the projects, and for us to talk together as a team. And then we have 8 different lines of business, and we're working to establish councils that are at the general manager level. So we have the senior leaders, we have the general managers, So we've kind of got some governance feeding up to that. And then we're actually looking to build down even further to create a frontline advisory board council too, because there's just so many different layers and all of them have those different perspectives that we talked about earlier. But there's been a number of things that they've brought to fruition, which are kind of exciting. One of them, which we actually just had earlier this week, is our day of organization. And that's where we don't have any meetings as a company. So we don't schedule anything, no broadcasts, we don't send any company-wide emails. And we help people kind of focus and have that time around the priorities that we're trying to drive. And then this is something that it's actually sponsored by that Voice of the Field Council. So it actually started a long time ago, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It was one day, and then it grew to quarterly, and then it grew to monthly. And now we're trying to get one day like that every month, where people could just focus on what they need to do, because we've all experienced the death by meeting. So that's one really great thing that the council has put in place that I'm very proud of.
So the first thing you said, and I'm not trying to nitpick just the exact phrasing that you said, but intake all of the pain points, right? And that may not be stated as the objective, as the voice of the field verbatim, but one thing that came to my mind is I could see kind of opening up the can of worms and it becoming just an endless bitch session, right?
Uh,
How do you have you found practices or ways to structure those sessions that can unlock the pain points, but without it just turning into, hey, let's get into a room for an hour and be cynical and negative, right? And then let's go off and try to be positive when we go back to our jobs, right? I could see that being difficult to manage. How have you
That's
handled that?
a fair question. Yeah, so there's a couple ways that we do it. So first of all, we have an insight intake form. So it's something that anybody in the organization can fill out. And then the council gets together and they review, or they get assigned. There's all structure and governance around the backside, and then reporting up to the right person. So we've kind of got that piece going on, but then we also meet monthly as a group. And we actually just had our meeting yesterday. And I have to laugh because one of the things that my team was trying to share was the new priorities for the year, and we're trying to make some changes around communication vehicle we call the Loop. It's a newsletter that we have, and basically we're kind of centralizing some things, and there were some concerns, and it did turn a little negative at some point, but I have to say, you know, we take that all in. So one of the things that we teach in change management is you need to love your resistors, listen, understand, and validate. So we take that very seriously. And they had a lot of good points, and it's affected us to make some changes to what we were thinking. It's the reason why we brought it to them anyway. So it's all good. And I think, we're building trust with them by saying, we hear you, you're right, or you know what, we do hear you, but this is the reason why that piece of that's not going to work. So I think it's evolved over time into, they did initially start out as bitch or gripe sessions. I could think back to, we had a change in a cell phone policy that went kind of off the rails and was actually repealed back. I'll spare you the crazy details on that one. But, now we've got a group of us, trusted advisors that have been doing this for a while. And again, we brought the operations and the subject matter experts together, whereas these two groups didn't talk before. So now they've got relationship, right? So it's evolved from those bitch sessions, and sometimes we go down the rabbit hole, and I think, we do our best to kind of pull people back, help them understand that we're validating whatever their concern is, because most of the time we find people just want to be heard, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and any not only in that grouping, but any change that we roll out, we've got folks that are upset about whatever we're trying to do, and sometimes it's reflecting inward, right? Have we explained why? Do they fully understand what we're trying to do?
I was just going to say that myself, because I think that's the other half of it is, not that there's just two halves, that would oversimplify it, but at least two main sides is first letting them be heard. Second is sharing with them some of the why about why we're making the change. Hey, maybe some of these ideas are things that we thought about. Doesn't mean that we're doing them, but here's why we can't do them, because there are downstream implications of that. And as you've talked about, earning trust and building credibility with those folks that, hey, we're not just a bunch of knuckleheads sitting up at corporate with bad ideas, But we also recognize that we have enough humility in the situation to know that we don't know everything. And that's why we're here to ask questions, right? So it's that combination of trying to earn that trust and confidence over time. And really, I mean, the point that you're making, I'm just supporting is to make it collaborative rather than just being a one-way change where
Yes.
somebody on the receiving end becomes a victim of that change, whether they wanted to or not.
Yeah, and I mean, what I found, there are certain changes. I can think of our organization where we are kind of catching and receiving it. Maybe it's something that's coming down globally. Maybe it's a structural reorganization type of change,
Mhm.
that we kind of have to catch, receive, and move forward with. And we try to do that, in the best way that we can with the people in mind. But most times, whether it's a process change or, a change in technology, we have the opportunity to co-create that change together. And I think where we have that opportunity, we need to take it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tell me more about the Frontline Advisory Board, whatever you can share. It sounds like this isn't quite implemented yet, but perhaps
No.
the best place to start is what's the gap that you're looking to fill that doesn't exist with the voice of the field as it is today that, is kind of causing you to want to look at the advisory board in the first place?
Yeah, not yet, but it's a dream, and I have a feeling it'll come to fruition. So there's so many different levels of our organization, right? When we think about, senior leaders in North America, we've got maybe 2,000, senior leaders. And then we think about our site managers, the number of people that we have there, overseeing large sites. So, this might be somebody who oversees a school district that has 70 buildings, and they oversee food and facilities and all of the managers and all the employees. So there's another level down that we need to go, and it's the people that are at the front line that are right face to face with our customers. And we don't always do our due diligence and kind of connecting in with them. I think sometimes it can be challenging, especially from a communication standpoint. We don't have email addresses for all of our frontline employees. Right now, the vehicle that we use to reach them are through our huddles. So these are weekly documents that we put together with some scripted talking points and some flexibility for the account to talk about what's important to them or their client and their customers. So we're reaching them through their managers. And I think that we really need to hear from these people firsthand. So we certainly do focus groups, we do engagement surveys of that population, but we need to be talking to them more regularly, and we need to increase the amount of two-way dialogue that we have with them.
All right, there's a whole lot. We could probably spend a whole other hour just talking about some of the things that you just said there. The first is that I just want to reinforce for folks that may not have heard, this is so important. And one of the reasons why we actually call the show Frontline Innovators is that we are highlighting the differences between training and change and digital transformation initiatives as they relate to frontline workers as compared or really contrasted with those things that would happen with a knowledge worker community, right? That's primarily office based or working at a desktop. And so something as simple as what you just said creates a really big problem, which is that they don't have email. So when we think about
Yeah,
corporate communications, the most common way to communicate with people in corporations, internally at least, is via email. But if an entire segment of our population doesn't have email, and even in cases where they technically have email addresses, the frontline worker roles are typically not sitting in front of their
right.
inbox all day like many of us
Yeah,
might be, right? So they might have email, but they're not checking it 47 times a day and checking it from their mobile device and stuff like that, right? So I'd like to explore that a little bit further about,
sure.
you've now highlighted in part of your answer, you've highlighted the importance now with the role of the supervisor who probably does have email. So they get a flurry of communications sent to them that they are expected to relay in a non-digital fashion to their team.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, well, two things come to mind. So I have to share this story for you because we talked about that school district example, right? Where a general manager might have 70 sites that they're overseeing. And I remember going there and I said, please tell me, how do you communicate? Even with the people that are supervisors at the different satellites. So think about, elementary school, middle school, high school. And they looked at me and they said, "Oh, the brown envelope." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And it was the driver, it was the delivery driver that was going to all these locations with a brown paper envelope that was their means of communication. I was just floored by that thought. And currently what we have in place are these huddles, right? So they're 1-2 pages just talking about the different aspects of things that are important to let the employee know. So maybe there's some human resources centered information. Maybe there's some information about whatever's happening seasonally or from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. So it gives the managers kind of what they need to gather all of that information. But the manager has to go out and whether they receive it in their weekly bulletin, it's a poll, right? So they're pulling it down. They're looking at it, and this is happening every week. They're figuring out what they're going to say, and they do it, right? I would say for the most part we have a good adoption rate of that, but it's not getting us what we've needed. So especially it came to late in COVID, when we really felt the need to kind of communicate a little bit more with that population given everything that was happening. We looked at data of we had some personal email addresses that we had captured through the interview process, and we had 75,000, and we're like, well, what if we tried reaching to this population? We have the capability to send something electronically to see what the open rates are, to see if there's appetite. And so we did do some experimenting around that, and it depends on what the topic is, but we do find that there is a good adoption rate, or open rate rather, of them kind of looking at that information. And now we're seeking some more funding, because there really is an investment required, whether it's email addresses, whether it's an app. It doesn't replace those conversations that need to happen from the staff to the managers. But we're still kind of experimenting. So even with our seasonal messages, so we just did one around Veterans Day, and kind of some of the importance. And it's so interesting, because we had people kind of writing back saying, I really needed this. Thank you for sending this. Or this was a really hard week, or this means so much to me. And I was like, we need to do more of this. And that's back to that connectivity, right? And helping people have that sense of belonging and happiness. So those are some of the things that we're kind of exploring as a team in the short term.
I always try to make sure we don't turn the show into a skillful commercial, but you just made me think about something that I just have to share from my day job. And we have a messaging capability built into the Skillful platform. So we're trying to connect the disconnected workers. We have a training platform that gets deployed to the devices of those mobile employees. And we have this messaging capability where supervisors or project leaders can communicate to the frontline workers through the platform. And I'll be honest, when we built that capability in, it had come from some requests where I thought it would largely be stick-based communications, like, hey, you got to get this thing done by Friday. Don't forget,
Yeah.
kind of nudge, kind of emails or communications like that. We've gone through an exercise with a few clients where we've actually reviewed what are the supervisors actually sending to their teams, right? We've looked through the logs of that. It has been so profoundly positive to see the way that the supervisors are communicating with their team, sending positive encouragement, really just mostly positive reinforcement. Yes, there were some supervisors that were, kind of on the stick side of things, using it as a nudging tool, but it was really uplifting actually to go through some of the logs. And as a product team now, we then come back and say, wow, okay, we've just unlocked something that we didn't really think that we were unlocking. We thought this was just like a reminder tool, but that gave us a signal that maybe we need to be investing more in this capability because it was kind of a secondary feature. And now we're starting to say, maybe we need to bring this front and center, as our team would call it, as a first-class feature to really unlock the potential for communication between the supervisors and their teams. Because there's one thing, I've done a lot of ride-alongs, and you touched on this a little bit before, and the gentleman I spoke with earlier talked about this. The men and women on the front lines are isolated. When we say front lines, we think about, oftentimes that conjures up an image of front lines as a team of people being out on the front lines. But
Yeah.
many employees on the front lines in a commercial sense, because we're not on the military front lines, we're in a commercial sense, on those front lines, they're out there by themselves. They're driving a
Yeah.
truck by themselves. They're doing a delivery by themselves. They're servicing equipment by themselves. So they are by themselves, and there's a level of isolation in those roles. So this messaging capability, and with your background in corporate communications, thinking about ways that we can draw them in closer, to me is just such a super positive thing. And I think it's easy for us to overlook it because it's not about like how do they do their job?
Yeah.
It's not about communicating SOPs all the time. There may just be something about connecting that disconnected worker, about making them feel part of something that the normal environment might allow them to feel a little isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what we heard when we just did our voice engagement survey. Um, the top three things that we heard or scored the lowest, rather, I'll just say it that way:
Yeah.
happiness, belonging, and career growth. And that was from our frontline employees. And I'm like, oh my goodness, exactly what you just said, Justin. And this has nothing to do with them doing their job. How do they become a part of something or feel a part of something or grow with the organization? And I was like, wow, it's not rocket science. I think, and it's kind of back to that first question you asked me. It's about that connectivity, right? How do we build that connectivity? How do we share with them, what is their role, and how do they understand, where the company is going, and how they're a part of that or a critical part of that equation.
Yeah. That's amazing. Are there other technologies that you are looking at or that you are currently using today to help bridge the gap on some of this disconnectedness with that frontline workforce?
It's interesting. So we've got a couple groups that are using kind of QR codes and cell phones. So even when we went to the engagement survey, there was no more paper, which we had done historically. And I had the opportunity to visit one of the sites and kind of experience and help some of the frontline employees take the survey. And it was just eye-opening. I'd be like, okay, you need to open your phone and scan the QR code, and oh, where your camera is, where you take a picture. People would snap the picture. I was like, no, 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 you don't take the picture. You open your phone, or they'd be like, my Wi-Fi is not connected, and then they get to one screen in their phone, and then it didn't allow them to scroll down, or it wasn't kind of intuitive to them, and it was just, you tripped your way through that process. And again, we've got people that are designing this that haven't gone through all those steps or seen kind of the pain points. How do we remove some of those barriers to make it easier for people just to take a survey to tell us what they need? So that one was kind of eye-opening. And then we're trying to use that also with our beverage coolers. So how do we set planograms for our retail locations? We have a lot of frontline employees doing that. And again, back to the QR code. So there certainly is some challenges with adoption and implementation that I think folks didn't anticipate. And that's really the role when we think about change, is really kind of going deep and understanding the stakeholders, their needs, the barriers. How do you remove those barriers? We spend a lot of time talking about resistance too as a group, but I found that when it comes to frontline, it's really about removing those barriers to be successful.
Yeah. How would you delineate between the barriers and resistance? Are you saying resistance is primarily them saying no?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Talk
Yeah.
me through that a little bit more.
So one of the things that we do with it's actually a training, but it's also, we take on a live project for the companies. We bring a group of 50 or 60 people together, all kind of levels of the organization, to solve a problem for the company. We did that for our beverage because we wanted to grow our sales. And we had them draw out from start to finish the steps that are required, and kind of like nodes of like, what, step one is you need to make sure you have the planogram. And then we identified kind of the barriers or the critical points of failure within that process. So until we removed those barriers, the resistance didn't really matter, because we weren't setting people up to be successful. The resistance is when you catch and receive the information, need to implement it, and you've got a manager saying, no, I'm not going to do that. So it really, barriers had to come first in that project. And until we removed them, we couldn't get to the resistance part. And then when we think about the resistance piece, we do spend a lot of time on that too. It's very important. And we teach that through the use of animal personas, which has been really, really fun way to kind of bring it to life of, hey, are you an ostrich? Do you bury your head in the sand when you have a change? Are you a beaver? Do you build up dams and say, it can't be done because of this? Are you the owl? Have you been around a long time and say, we've done this before, it's not going to work? And so we kind of have people, it's so funny. We put all the animals up there, we get their ears, everybody can kind of take one and identify. But the first thing they do is say, oh, my boss is such a, shark, or so-and-so is a beaver. And we're like, wait, it's about you, not about the
Yeah.
people you work with. So reflect inward. And
Yep.
then we talk about that those personas, there's negative qualities and there's positive qualities. So if somebody is a shark, they can also be your biggest advocate to get people on board. And the wolf pack is kind of like that, around rallying people. So that's kind of just been a fun way for us to introduce and talk about resistance.
That's absolutely fascinating. I've also found the resistance, that this goes back to just some of the communication things that we talked about before. It's fear of the unknown, and it's
Yeah.
the vulnerability that they feel. I think this is something that early in my career, if I could go back 10 or 15 years to some of the projects I was a part of earlier, with the newfound knowledge I have today, with the wisdom I have today, I guess maybe, that there was a lot more anxiety about change than I really understood. And what I misunderstood because of my immaturity at the time, the change I'm talking about is mostly around technology change and the underlying business process change that happens as a result of implementing new technology on the front lines. But people would come back and they would have this whole list of versions of no. This isn't going to work
Mhm.
because of this. This isn't going to work because of that. It won't work. That'll never work here. That'll never work at this location. That'll never work with my customers. That'll never work with my truck, whatever. They and I misunderstood those at the time, thinking that they were legitimate misses. And in some cases, of course, they
Hmm.
were legitimate. Maybe there was something goofy about this particular market. We didn't understand that their trucks had, something different than the trucks in the other markets, right? Whatever. But in more cases than not, I think it was just that human's way of saying, I am uncomfortable about this. There are a
Yes.
whole host of things here that I don't know anything about. And I'm going to pick the one or two things I know a little something about, which is, well, this button has been on the right side of my mobile device for years. And now you're telling me it's going to be on the left side. It's just not going to work because I'm right-handed, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
And what they were really saying is, I'm nervous. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to learn this. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to become comfortable with this new solution. I had one employee that they'd had technology in their hands for several years. He said, I just figured out how to use this one. And now you're telling me I have to change and move to
Yeah.
another one, you know?
Yeah.
And the old one was slow and clunky and it didn't actually work very well. The new one was faster and slicker and much higher performance, but it was the one that he didn't know versus the one that he did know. And so I feel
Yeah.
like when I hear you say resistance and you start talking that through, some of those stories come to my mind that it's not necessarily like the rational or objective reasons for being resistant. It's just those feelings that we get inside and we articulate them in
Yes.
ways that are different than what's actually going on in our heart.
That is so true. Two things kind of come to mind is, we all go through this emotional journey around change. No one of us are exempt from that.
No.
And so we spend a lot of time kind of educating folks that lead projects and initiatives, or lead people around that emotional journey, just for awareness sake. And we would have a slide. It's all about anxiety, and kind of as you have anger, it's usually a secondary emotion. And at some points you land in this valley of despair, and people, swing around that wheel, whether it's that fear is first, and if they can get past that, then they might go into, some experimentation and inquiry about it, but then something might happen, so they might go backwards, and they might never get to that acceptance point. So we spend time educating about kind of the team aspect, but we've also spent a lot of time educating around the individual aspect. Because I think until we reflect inward and see it in ourselves, we can't understand it for others. So we spend a lot of time talking about change and anxiety, and the way we talk about it is around catching a hot potato. Something happens, you've got this fear, this stipulation about it. It's a hot potato, and your brain is just naturally wired to say, what if this, what if that? And it usually goes to like worst case scenario, right?
Of course.
So we tell people, you need to drop the potato, catch the potato, acknowledge it, drop it. And we've spent a lot of time actually just talking about that amongst our leadership teams, to help them kind of get themselves on board. I say sometimes you have to change manage yourself
Yeah.
before you can change manage others.
Yeah. It's a really interesting thought about separating out the teams versus individuals. And you're making me think of something else here. We're running out of time, but I have to we just need to talk this one more thing through if we can. Um, the idea that I think some of the people in these roles actually like the independence of being on their own in a frontline role. Delivery drivers, as an example, you haven't talked about delivery. Well, you actually have talked a little bit about delivery drivers, so that's a good example here. There is an element of independence in their role, right? They're driving a truck probably by themselves. They may have one teammate, but they're not with a team of 15 people. They're with a team of one or two at the most, right? So they're kind of independent people. And are they um, I know we want them to be a part of a team, so that's part of the equation, but we also need to recognize their independence. I'm just kind of repeating back what you said, and it also makes me wonder how they learn, how they absorb that change, how they absorb the communication. Do they want it to be delivered in a team setting, or do they
Yeah.
want to be able to absorb those things on their own? And yeah, so I don't know if I have a direct question about that, but you're kind of getting my wheels turning a little bit about the dynamics that we talk a lot about team building and we should continue to talk about team building, but we need to recognize the individuals. And I do think that the folks that we deal with in particular, field service employees, delivery drivers and stuff, their work is predisposed to working independently. And there may be some things that when we're thinking about them, we need to address them as individuals. So
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, when I think about our business, we have a lot of people in the facilities management business. So, again, they're a part of a team, but they're doing their own job. Or even, from a food service standpoint, they've each kind of got their own little silo or a different site or what
yeah,
part they play and whatever meal is being served. People come along on the journey in all different ways, right? So, you might have folks that are early adopters that are just very enthusiastic about it. And then, that you have the rest of us that are,
yeah,
what does this mean for me? So what? Or, explain how this is going to make my life better.
right.
And sometimes I think it's a combination, right, of a team setting and kind of having that group therapy, as well as having those individual conversations for folks that kind of need to vent or just, need a little bit more time to be brought along.
Yeah. That's awesome. This has been such a great discussion. Julie, thank you so much for participating in today's session. And I hope you enjoyed being on the other side of the microphone and camera today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
To our audience, we're going to wrap it up there, but thank you very much for investing this time with us to explore others' experiences and ideas around technology adoption and change with frontline teams. Hopefully, you'll be able to take an idea from today's conversation and put it to work with the frontline teams that you support. And unless this is your first episode, and if you weren't listening midway through, you probably already know that this podcast is sponsored by Skillful. That's when I refer to my day job, that's what I'm referring to. Skillful is the only end-to-end systems training platform that's optimized for frontline operations. You can learn more about how you can solve your frontline systems training challenges by visiting skillful.com. I spell it every time because we spell it a little differently. It's SKYLLFUL.com. Thank you so very much for joining the episode today. One last thing I want to close out on that's a little bit different. As part of being a participant in the podcast today, we will be inviting Julie to come and join us on the Frontline Innovators Council. This is a once per month session, kind of held as a roundtable or brainstorming conversation that we hold for an hour. We invite all of the previous podcast guests over the years to come and join us in that session. We have anywhere between 4 and 14 people, probably something like that join on a monthly basis. People kind of can come and go as they please. We decided in 2024 to expand the invite list to anybody in your network that is talking about the challenges of technology adoption and change on the front lines. So, Julie, you'll be extended an invitation today to come and join us in the Frontline Innovators Council. But if you have colleagues or other people in your network that you'd like to extend the invitation to, we'd love to expand it to them. And I would say the same thing to our audience. If you or somebody that you know would find value in participating in those conversations, we'd love to include you in that. And this is people from a bunch of different roles, from change management to IT implementation folks to project teams, to operations leadership, to learning and development leaders. We've got a whole bunch of different folks from a whole bunch of different industries. Most of the participants are from large, probably $1 billion and up companies. So we're typically dealing in conversations about kind of large, complex organizational challenges of implementing change across these organizations. So I would love to have you come and join. I'm going to wrap it up there. That was the longest outro that I've ever done, but I had a lot to share today. Julie, thank you very much again for participating.
Thank you.